In a city built on brotherly love, he taught everyone the language of fear. In the South Philadelphia neighborhood of Ducktown in 1929, Nicodemo Domenico Scarfo entered a world that would never be the same. The Great Depression had crushed America, leaving breadlines stretching for blocks and families sleeping in the streets. But young Nicky wasn't born into complete poverty. His family ran a small business, his father worked, his mother kept the home. Yet something was broken inside the boy from the beginning. Something cold. Something wrong. At 5 feet 5 inches tall, Nicky grew up small in a world where size meant everything. The neighborhood kids mocked him, pushed him around, called him names. In the schoolyard, he was the runt. On the corner, he was the joke. But inside that tiny frame burned a rage so fierce it could melt steel. He didn't just want respect. He wanted worship. He didn't just want fear. He wanted terror. And in the streets of South Philly, where the Italian mob had roots deeper than the Liberty Bell, young Scarfo found his path to power. By 13, he dropped out of school. Education was for suckers, for people who believed in the American dream. Nicky believed in the American nightmare, the one where you take what you want when you want it and anyone who stands in your way gets erased. He started hanging around the corners where the made men gathered, watching, learning, studying the hierarchy of violence that governed his world. The mob wasn't just a criminal organization to him, it was a religion, and he was ready to become its most devoted disciple. His early years were marked by petty crimes, theft, assault, shakedowns. But even then, people noticed something different about little Nicky. When other teenagers threw punches, Nicky went for the eyes. When others threatened, Nicky followed through. There was no bluff in him, no mercy, no hesitation. He was a coiled spring of pure malice, and everyone who crossed his path felt it. In the 1950s, Scarfo caught the attention of the Philadelphia crime family, then run by Angelo Bruno, known as the Gentle Don. Bruno believed in diplomacy, in keeping a low profile, in making money quietly without attracting attention. He was old school, a throwback to an era when the mob operated in shadows and silence. Under Bruno's reign, Philadelphia became one of the most stable and profitable mob territories in America. But stability bored Nicky Scarfo. Silence suffocated him. He didn't want to hide in the shadows. He wanted to set them on fire. Scarfo worked his way up through the ranks, but he was never a natural fit for Bruno's style. Where Bruno negotiated, Scarfo threatened. Where Bruno forgave, Scarfo annihilated. His reputation for violence grew like a cancer. Brutal, unstoppable, consuming everything around it. He didn't just kill people. He made examples of them. A beating from Scarfo meant weeks in the hospital. A debt to Scarfo meant your business burned down. An insult to Scarfo meant your funeral. In 1963, everything changed. During a dispute at the Oregon Diner in South Philadelphia, a man named Dugan made the fatal mistake of disrespecting little Nicky in public. Words were exchanged. Tempers flared. And then Scarfo did what he always did. He escalated beyond reason. He stabbed Dugan with a knife again and again, in front of dozens of witnesses. The attack was so vicious, so frenzied, that even hardened mobsters looked away. Dugan survived, but barely. Scarfo was arrested, tried, and convicted of manslaughter. He served time in Eastern State Penitentiary, the same Gothic fortress that once held Al Capone. But prison didn't break Scarfo, it refined him. Behind bars, he networked with other criminals, built alliances, and earned a reputation as a man who would never rat, never bend, never break. When he walked out in 1971, he was no longer just a violent street thug. He was a soldier with connections, respect, and a hunger for power that had only grown sharper during his years in a cage. But Angelo Bruno didn't forget what Scarfo was. The Gentle Don saw the monster lurking beneath little Nicky's skin, and he made a decision that would seal Philadelphia's fate. He exiled Scarfo to Atlantic City, a dying seaside town that nobody wanted. It was supposed to be a punishment, a way to keep the rabid dog away from the main action. Bruno thought he was protecting his empire. Instead, he'd just planted the seed of its destruction. When Nicodemo Scarfo arrived in Atlantic City in the early 1970s, the town was a graveyard. The boardwalk was crumbling, the casinos were closed, the tourists had vanished. It was a place where empires went to die, not where they were born. But Scarfo saw what others didn't. He saw potential. He saw opportunity. He saw a kingdom waiting for a king willing to seize it with bloody hands. In 1976, New Jersey legalized gambling, and Atlantic City exploded overnight. Suddenly, billions of dollars poured into the town as casinos sprouted like weeds along the boardwalk. Resorts International, Caesars, Bally's, the Tropicana, they all came, each one a golden goose waiting to be plucked. And little Nicky was already there, positioned perfectly to sink his claws into every brick, every slot machine, every counting room. Scarfo controlled the construction unions, which meant nothing got built without his permission and his cut. Concrete, steel, plumbing, electrical work, every trade paid tribute to little Nicky. Contractors who refused found their equipment sabotaged, their workers beaten, their projects mysteriously delayed for months. The message was clear. You either paid Scarfo or you didn't build at all. But construction was just the beginning. Scarfo infiltrated the casinos themselves, placing his men in key positions. Bartenders who skimmed cash, dealers who signaled high rollers, managers who doctored the books. Money flowed like a river, and Scarfo drank deeply. He opened his own businesses, restaurants, bars, nightclubs, each one a front for laundering the millions he pulled from the casinos. Atlantic City became Scarfo's personal ATM, and he withdrew from it every single day. Yet even as the money poured in, Scarfo remained paranoid, violent, and ruthless. He ruled through terror, not loyalty. His capos feared him more than they respected him. His soldiers obeyed him out of self-preservation, not honor. He would fly into rages over perceived slights, ordering beatings and murders over trivial insults. A wrong look could get you killed. A missed payment could get your family killed. In Scarfo's world, there was no room for mistakes, no tolerance for weakness, no mercy for anyone. Back in Philadelphia, Angelo Bruno continued to rule with his gentle hand, but the winds of change were blowing. The old ways were dying, and a new generation of mobsters, hungrier, more violent, more reckless, was rising. And none were hungrier than little Nicky, exiled in Atlantic City, building his army and waiting for his moment. On March 21, 1980, Angelo Bruno sat in a car outside his South Philadelphia home after a quiet dinner. He was 70 years old, weary, ready to retire. For 2 decades, he'd kept the peace, made everyone rich, and avoided the kind of warfare that destroyed other crime families. But peace is fragile, and Bruno's enemies had been sharpening their knives for years. A shotgun blast shattered the night, and Bruno's head exploded in a spray of blood and bone. The gentle Don was dead, murdered by his own people, betrayed by the organization he'd built. His death sent shockwaves through the underworld, and Philadelphia's mob erupted into chaos. Capos turned on each other, alliances shattered, and the streets ran red with blood. The era of diplomacy was over. The era of savagery had begun. In the aftermath, Philip Chicken Man Testa took over as boss, but his reign lasted barely a year. In March 1981, a bomb ripped through his South Philadelphia home, tearing him apart and leaving a crater where his front porch used to be. The violence was escalating, spiraling out of control, and nobody could stop it. The Philadelphia mob was eating itself alive, and everyone was waiting to see who would emerge from the carnage. That man was Nicodemo Scarfo. With both Bruno and Testa dead, Scarfo returned from Atlantic City like a demon rising from hell. He'd been patient, biding his time, building his power base. Now, with the throne empty and the family in disarray, he seized control with an iron fist. In 1981, at the age of 52, little Nicky became the boss of the Philadelphia crime family. And Philadelphia would never be the same. Under Scarfo's rule, the Philadelphia mob transformed from a traditional Mafia family into something far more sinister, a death cult with Nicky as its bloodthirsty god. His philosophy was simple: kill or be killed. Trust no one. Show no mercy. Anyone who questioned him disappeared. Anyone who hesitated was eliminated. Anyone who showed even a hint of disloyalty was executed. often in the most brutal ways imaginable. Scarfo demanded absolute obedience and total fear. He didn't want capos who could think for themselves. He wanted soldiers who would pull the trigger without asking why. His inner circle consisted of psychopaths and sadists, men like Salvatore Chucky Merlino, Nicky Whip Milano, and Philip Crazy Phil Leonetti, Scarfo's own nephew. Together, they turned Philadelphia into a killing field. The body count rose month after month, year after year. Mobsters gunned down in restaurants, in their homes, on the street in broad daylight. Witnesses who testified found themselves dead before the trial. Informants were tortured and mutilated, their bodies dumped in the Delaware River or buried in the Pine Barrens. Scarfo didn't just kill his enemies. He erased them, made them vanish as if they'd never existed at all. One of his most infamous orders came when he learned that a young mobster named Salvatore Testa, son of the murdered Chicken Man, was becoming too popular, too powerful, too loved by the other soldiers. Testa was handsome, charismatic, a natural leader. He had the respect Scarfo could never earn, the loyalty Scarfo could never command. And for that, he had to die. Scarfo lured Testa to a meeting under the pretense of being promoted to capo. Testa arrived excited, honored, ready to ascend to the next level. Instead, he was ambushed, shot multiple times, and buried in a shallow grave. His murder devastated the Philadelphia family, but nobody dared speak out. Scarfo's message was clear. Even the most beloved, most respected, most talented mobster was expendable if Nicky felt threatened. The violence wasn't limited to the mob. Scarfo extorted businesses across Philadelphia and South Jersey, demanding protection money from restaurants, bars, construction companies, even mom-and-pop shops. Business owners who refused were beaten, their stores firebombed, their families threatened. The entire city lived in fear of little Nicky, a tiny man whose shadow stretched across every neighborhood, every street corner, every dark alley. While Philadelphia burned, Atlantic City thrived under Scarfo's control. The casinos were printing money, and Scarfo had his hands in every pot. But his Atlantic City operation wasn't just about gambling and construction. It was about complete domination. He wanted to own the entire city, from the boardwalk to the back alleys, from the high-rise hotels to the rundown motels where dealers pushed crystal and dope to desperate addicts. Scarfo's lieutenant in Atlantic City was his nephew, Philip Leonetti, a cold-blooded killer who carried out his uncle's orders without question. Together, they turned the seaside resort into a criminal empire. They controlled the unions, the politicians, the police. Anyone who wanted to operate in Atlantic City had to pay tribute to Scarfo. Anyone who tried to move in on his territory ended up floating face down in the bay. But Scarfo's greed was insatiable. He didn't just skim from the casinos. He wanted to own them. He pressured casino executives, infiltrated their operations, and funneled millions into offshore accounts. The FBI estimated that Scarfo's organization was pulling in over $10 million a year from Atlantic City alone, and that was just what they could track. The real number was likely much higher. Yet with success came paranoia. Scarfo trusted no one, not even his closest allies. He had his own men followed, their phones tapped, their homes watched. He suspected betrayal everywhere, and often his suspicions were correct. The FBI had begun infiltrating his organization, planting bugs, flipping witnesses, building a case that would eventually bring down his entire empire. But Scarfo, blinded by power and rage, didn't see the walls closing in. In the mid-1980s, the first cracks appeared in Scarfo's empire. Federal prosecutors, led by relentless U.S. Attorney Edward S.G. Dennis Jr., had spent years building a RICO case against the Philadelphia mob. They had wiretaps, surveillance photos, financial records, but they needed something more. They needed someone on the inside to flip to testify to bring the whole organization down from within. That someone was Thomas "Tommy" Del Giorno, one of Scarfo's most trusted capos. Del Giorno had been a loyal soldier for years, carrying out hits, collecting tribute, enforcing Scarfo's brutal reign. But the violence had become too much, even for him. He'd watched friends murdered, families destroyed, and he knew that eventually, Scarfo would turn on him too. So in 1986, Del Giorno made the decision that would destroy the Philadelphia mob. He became a government witness. His testimony was devastating. He described murders in graphic detail, named names, revealed the inner workings of Scarfo's operation. He told prosecutors where the bodies were buried, who gave the orders, who pulled the triggers. His cooperation opened the floodgates. Other mobsters, sensing the end was near, began cooperating as well. Nicky Crow Caramandi, another high-ranking member, flipped and provided even more evidence. But the most damaging betrayal came from within Scarfo's own family. Philip Leonetti, Scarfo's nephew and underboss, the man who had killed more than a dozen people on his uncle's orders, decided he'd had enough. He saw the writing on the wall. The organization was collapsing, the feds were closing in, and his uncle's paranoia had become unbearable. In 1989, Leonetti became a government witness, and his testimony sealed Scarfo's fate. Leonetti described a life of constant fear, of watching his uncle order murders over trivial insults, of carrying out executions of men he considered friends. He revealed the extent of Scarfo's Atlantic City operation, the casino infiltration, the union corruption, the millions in illegal profits. His testimony was so detailed, so comprehensive, that it left no doubt. Nicodemo Scarfo had built his empire on blood, and now that blood would drown him. In 1988, Nicodemo Scarfo and 16 members of his organization were indicted on multiple charges of racketeering, murder, extortion, and conspiracy. The trial was a media circus, with reporters packed into the courtroom and cameras lining the streets outside. For the first time, the public got a glimpse inside the Philadelphia mob, and what they saw horrified them. Witnesses described murders carried out in cold blood, bodies dismembered and disposed of like garbage, businesses destroyed, families terrorized. They talked about how Scarfo would fly into rages over minor slights, ordering hits on people who'd done nothing more than look at him wrong. They described a man consumed by paranoia, violence, and an insatiable need for control. Scarfo sat through the trial with his trademark arrogance, smirking at witnesses, glaring at prosecutors, acting as if the entire proceeding was beneath him. But inside, he must have known the truth. His empire was crumbling, his soldiers had turned, and there was no escape this time. The evidence was overwhelming, the witnesses credible, and the jury wasn't buying his tough guy act. On November 19, 1988, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty on all counts. Scarfo was sentenced to 55 years in federal prison. Additional charges followed. In 1989, he was convicted of ordering the murder of Salvatore Testa and received another life sentence. The reign of Little Nicky was over. The man who'd terrorized Philadelphia for nearly a decade was finally behind bars, locked away where he could never hurt anyone again. But even in prison, Scarfo remained defiant. He refused to show remorse, refused to cooperate, refused to admit any wrongdoing. He was a mobster to his core, a believer in the old code of omerta, even as that code crumbled around him. His organization was destroyed, his family scattered, his empire reduced to ashes. And yet, he remained proud, arrogant, unbroken, a monster caged but never tamed. With Scarfo imprisoned, the Philadelphia mob collapsed. The violence had been too extreme, the betrayals too deep, the federal pressure too intense. The family splintered into factions, with various capos trying to seize control. But the glory days were over. The FBI had infiltrated every level of the organization, and anyone who tried to rebuild Scarfo's empire found themselves under indictment within months. Atlantic City, once Scarfo's personal kingdom, moved on without him. New casino regulations made it harder to skim money, and law enforcement cracked down on union corruption. The boardwalk empire that Little Nicky had built was dismantled piece by piece, and the millions he'd stolen were seized by the government. Philadelphia itself began to heal. The extortion rackets dried up, the violence subsided, and businesses could operate without fear of a firebomb or a shakedown. The city that Scarfo had held hostage for nearly a decade finally breathed free. But the scars remained, the families of murder victims, the businesses destroyed, the lives ruined by a tiny man's infinite capacity for cruelty. Nicodemo Scarfo spent his final years locked inside the federal prison system, moving from facility to facility, always isolated, always watched. His health deteriorated. Heart problems, dementia, the slow decay of an aging body. The fierce rage that had once made him terrifying was now just confusion and weakness. The man who'd ordered dozens of murders, who'd ruled Philadelphia with an iron fist, was reduced to a frail old prisoner shuffling through prison corridors. In 2017, at the age of 87, Nicodemo Domenico Scarfo died in a North Carolina federal prison. There were no grand funerals, no tearful eulogies, no mourners lining the streets. He died alone, forgotten by everyone except the families of his victims and the law enforcement agents who'd spent their careers bringing him down. His legacy is one of pure destruction. He didn't build anything lasting, didn't create any system of value, didn't leave behind anything but corpses and broken lives. He took the Philadelphia mob, a stable, profitable organization, and burned it to the ground in less than a decade. His reign of terror accomplished nothing except proving that violence for its own sake is a path to oblivion. Today, Nicodemo Scarfo is remembered as one of the most violent, paranoid, and destructive mob bosses in American history. He wasn't a criminal mastermind like Carlo Gambino. He wasn't a charismatic leader like John Gotti. He wasn't a strategic genius like Meyer Lansky. He was simply a vicious, insecure little man who climbed to power on a mountain of corpses and stayed there through sheer brutality. His story is a cautionary tale about what happens when violence becomes an end in itself, when fear replaces respect, when paranoia destroys trust. Scarfo's empire collapsed not because of law enforcement, but because he created an organization built on terror. And terror, unlike loyalty, is fragile. The moment his soldiers saw a way out, they took it, and his entire world came crashing down. In the end, little Nicky's greatest enemy wasn't the FBI, the prosecutors, or the rival mob families. It was himself. His rage, his paranoia, his need to dominate and destroy everything around him. He could have been a king, could have ruled Philadelphia for decades like Angelo Bruno had. Instead, he chose to be a tyrant, and tyrants always fall. Some men are born monsters. Some men become monsters. But Nicodemo Scarfo was something else entirely. A 5'5" nightmare who proved that the smallest men cast the darkest shadows. He didn't just kill his enemies. He killed his own empire. And when the smoke cleared, all that remained was blood, betrayal, and the legend of Little Nicky, the man who made Philadelphia bleed.